You've entered Void of Rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple. Subscribe. We're almost at 5,000 corrupted souls, but the Void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion, or face the consequences of defying the Void? Now let's jump into today's story. The screaming always stops eventually. That's what I tell myself when the nightmares get too loud. My name is Kaelen Dravik, and I've killed more demons than any hunter in recorded history. 372 confirmed kills over 5 years of service to the Ashen Covenant. They call me a legend in the taverns of every major city. Children whisper my name when they're afraid of monsters under their beds. Kings have offered me fortunes just to patrol their borders for a single season. But legends don't wake up screaming at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat that smells like sulphur and regret. You can tell what I am just by looking at me. The blackened steel of my armor bears silver runes that pulse with each heartbeat, ancient symbols carved by master smiths using techniques that predate written language. Each rune represents a different aspect of demon hunting: protection from possession, enhancement of physical abilities, and most importantly, the power to see through demonic deception. Or so I was told. My cloak hangs in tatters from countless battles, shredded by claws and acidic breath, and the kind of violence that would break ordinary men. The fabric was once deep blue, the ceremonial colour of the Ashen Covenant, but years of demon blood have stained it black. Sometimes, in certain light, you can still see hints of the original colour peeking through like forgotten hope. But it's my eyes that really unnerve people. Pale as winter fog, with a luminescence that comes from prolonged exposure to demonic essence. When I focus on something, they glow brighter and people look away. They say it's like staring into the depths of someone else's grave. The locals in whatever godforsaken town I'm visiting always ask the same questions. How many demons have you seen? What's the worst thing you've ever fought? How do you sleep at night knowing what's out there? They never ask the right question. How do you know they were demons? I should have asked that question years ago. Would have saved everyone a lot of suffering. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Soulreaver first, because understanding my weapon is understanding me. 8 feet of rune-forged steel curved like death's own grin, my scythe is more than a tool. It's a living thing. The blade thirsts for blood, with an almost sentient hunger, growing sharper and more eager with every kill. When I swing it, the air itself seems to part in reverence. When it strikes, the impact resonates through dimensions I don't have names for. The strangest thing about Soulreaver is how it drinks. Not just blood, but something deeper. The essence of whatever it kills gets drawn into the metal, leaving behind husks that crumble to dust within hours. I've seen veteran hunters examine the aftermath of my battles and shake their heads in confusion. Where they expect to find demon corpses, they find only stains and scattered ash. I used to think this was a blessing. Now I understand it was evidence. The abilities came gradually over years of what the Covenant called divine enhancement. Shadow Step manifested first. The power to dissolve my physical form into smoke and shadow, teleporting short distances in the blink of an eye. Useful for getting behind an enemy's guard, or escaping when overwhelmed by superior numbers. Blood Reaper followed within months. After each kill, crimson energy would flow from the corpse into my armor, healing wounds and restoring stamina. The sensation was indescribable, like drinking liquid starlight, every cell in my body singing with borrowed vitality. The more powerful the demon, the greater the restoration. Nightmare shards took longer to develop, and they frightened me when they first appeared. During combat, I could project fragments of my worst dreams into reality as weapons that existed somewhere between thought and substance. The projections would stagger enemies with visions of their own deaths, leaving them vulnerable to physical attack. But it was execution mode that truly set me apart from other hunters. When triggered, time seemed to slow while my movements became supernaturally precise. My scythe work transcended human limitation, each strike placed with surgical accuracy to cause maximum damage. In this state, I could carve through entire demon hordes without sustaining a single injury. The Covenant told me these abilities were gifts from the divine, earned through righteous service and unwavering dedication to protecting humanity. They held ceremonies to honor my achievements, granted me titles and privileges that lesser hunters could only dream of achieving. They were wrong about everything. The contract that changed my life arrived on a Wednesday morning in late autumn, sealed with wax that crackled when I broke it. The messenger was a boy, no older than 12, but his eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much death. "From the mayor of Droswen Reach," he said, thrusting the parchment at me like it might bite him. "He says it's urgent. People are dying. People are always dying. That's why hunters exist." But something about the boy's terror suggested this situation was different from the usual demonic harassment. I read the message twice, frowning at details that didn't align with standard demonic behavior. Families vanishing without trace near the old floodgates. Livestock found drained but otherwise unmarked. Strange sounds echoing up from the flooded districts. Voices calling in languages that predated human speech. Most disturbing were the survivor accounts. 3 separate witnesses described seeing loved ones change before their eyes, transforming from ordinary humans into creatures of nightmare. But the descriptions were wrong. Demons didn't transform humans. They possessed them, replaced them, or killed them. They didn't cause physical metamorphosis. Still, the sulphurous stench mentioned in the report was unmistakable evidence of demonic presence. Combined with the disappearances, it painted a clear picture of a major infestation that required immediate intervention. I packed my gear and rode for Drosswin Reach within the hour, Soulreaver secured across my back like a promise of violence. The journey took 3 days, through increasingly desolate countryside, past farms where crops withered despite favourable weather, and villages where no children played in the streets. But it was the dreams that truly worried me. For months, my sleep had been plagued by visions that felt more real than memory. I would relive battles I'd fought, except the details were wrong. The demons I killed would bleed red instead of black. Their death screams would sound human. Sometimes, in the moment before my scythe struck, I would see human faces beneath the monstrous features, terrified expressions that begged for mercy I never granted. I told myself it was battle fatigue. Every veteran hunter experienced nightmares, the mind's way of processing the horrors we witnessed in service to humanity. But these dreams carried a weight that ordinary nightmares lacked, as if they were trying to tell me something important, something I wasn't ready to hear. The city of Drosswin Reach perched precariously on the edge of a massive sinkhole, its newer districts built directly over the ruins of what came before. The great flooding had happened centuries ago, when ancient aqueducts burst during some forgotten war, but the residents still spoke of it in hushed tones as if it had occurred yesterday. Mayor Aldrich Greystone met me at the city gates, flanked by guards whose hands trembled on their weapon hilts. He was a thin man with prematurely grey hair, and the kind of nervous energy that comes from weeks of sleepless nights. "Thank the gods you've come," he said, wringing his hands as if trying to squeeze water from them. "We've lost 23 people in the last month. Men, women, children. It doesn't discriminate. They go missing near the old floodgates, and we find..." He paused, swallowing hard. "We find pieces. Always just pieces." I'd heard similar reports hundreds of times before, but something about his description nagged at me. "What kind of pieces?" Greystone glanced at his guards before answering. "Clothing, mostly. Personal effects. Sometimes bones that have been cleaned. But here's the strange part. We can never prove the remains belong to the missing people. The bones don't match in size or age. It's as if the victim simply vanished and left random debris in their place." That was unusual. Demons were messy eaters, but they typically left recognizable remains. The fact that the evidence didn't match the victim suggested either incredible intelligence on the part of the predator or something else entirely. "I'll need to examine the most recent disappearance site," I said, "and I want to speak with any survivors, people who witnessed the attacks but escaped." Greystone's expression darkened. "That's the other problem. We have 3 survivors, but their stories..." He shook his head. "They claim their loved ones transformed before their eyes, became monsters. It sounds like madness, but all 3 tell identical accounts." "Take me to them." The survivors were housed in the city's temple, where priests had been providing care for their shattered minds. The first was an elderly woman named Margaret Ashford, whose husband had disappeared 5 days earlier. She sat by a window overlooking the flooded district, her eyes unfocused and distant. "Tell me what you saw," I said gently, settling into a chair beside her. "William was checking the locks on our shop," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was just after sunset, and the streets were empty, except for us. Then he stopped moving. Just stood there like he was listening to something I couldn't hear." She turned to look at me, and I saw genuine terror in her eyes. His skin started to change colour. Not gradually, all at once, like paint spreading through water. His face stretched, and his fingers grew longer. When he opened his mouth, there were too many teeth. The description matched known demonic transformation patterns, but something felt wrong about the timing. Possession typically took hours or days, not seconds. What happened next? He looked at me with eyes that weren't his anymore and smiled. Then he said, "Thank you for helping me find this shape, Margaret. I'll make good use of it." And he walked away toward the floodgates, just walked away like he was going for an evening stroll. The second survivor, a merchant named Thomas Bradley, told an almost identical story about his teenage son. The third, a young mother named Elena Vasquez, described watching her 6-year-old daughter undergo the same transformation while they played in their garden. All 3 emphasized that the transformed individuals had thanked them before leaving. All 3 mentioned the creatures heading toward the flooded districts, and all 3 swore that the monsters had retained their loved ones' voices even after the physical changes were complete. I spent the rest of the day examining the disappearance sites, but found only the usual signs of demonic presence: sulfur residue, scorch marks, and that particular wrongness that made ordinary animals refuse to enter the area. Nothing that contradicted the survivors' accounts, but nothing that confirmed them either. As night fell, I prepared for my first hunt in Drosswin Reach. The demons came at midnight, crawling from storm drains like diseased spiders, emerging from cracks in reality. In the pale moonlight, they looked almost human, until you noticed the way their joints bent backward, or saw the extra rows of teeth gleaming in their elongated mouths. I counted 6 of them, which was a respectable hunting party by demon standards. They moved with coordination that suggested either pack intelligence or a controlling force, spreading out to flank me while maintaining formation discipline. Shadow Step activated without conscious thought, my body dissolving into smoke as I teleported behind the largest creature. Soulreaver materialized in my hands as I rematerialized, the curved blade singing through air made thick with anticipation. The scythe opened the demon's torso from shoulder to hip in a spray of black ichor that hissed when it hit stone. The remaining creatures shrieked and charged, but this was where my true power revealed itself. Nightmare shards erupted from my mind. Fragments of every terrible dream I'd endured made manifest as razor-edged projections of crystallized fear. The demons staggered as visions of their own destruction overwhelmed their primitive minds. In that moment of confusion, execution mode engaged. Time contracted to syrup slowness. I could see individual droplets of demon blood hanging in the air like dark stars. The creatures' movements became sluggish and predictable, their attacks telegraphed hours in advance. My scythe carved through flesh with impossible precision, each strike calculated to inflict maximum agony before delivering death. The battle lasted perhaps 10 seconds in real time, but felt like hours from my enhanced perspective. When normal time resumed, 6 demon corpses lay scattered across the alley in various states of dismemberment. Blood Reaper activated automatically, drawing crimson essence from the remains to heal cuts I hadn't even realized I'd sustained. But as the energy flowed into my armor, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. The blood wasn't black anymore. It was red. Human red. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps contamination from the human victims the demons had consumed. But doubt had been planted, and doubts have a way of growing in the darkness between heartbeats. That night, I dreamed of the same alley, the same battle. But in the dream, I could see the creatures' faces clearly as my scythe struck. They weren't the elongated monstrosities I remembered fighting. They were human faces, twisted with terror and confusion, mouths opening to speak words I couldn't hear over the sound of my own laughter. I woke to find my armor damp with blood that carried no sulphurous taint. The pattern continued for days. Each hunt followed the same script, swift, brutal efficiency, followed by nightmares that grew more realistic with every passing hour. My abilities strengthened noticeably with each kill. Shadow Step could carry me farther distances without strain. Blood Reaper healed wounds that should have been fatal. Nightmare shards became so vivid that pedestrians would scream and flee when the projections flickered at the edges of their vision. But other changes were occurring as well. Changes that should have alarmed me. The demons I killed began whispering my name as they died. Not in fear or rage, but with something that sounded disturbingly like gratitude. They would look at me with their final breath and say, "Thank you for freeing us, Kaelen. Thank you for ending the pain." I rationalized it as demonic deception, a last-ditch attempt to sow confusion and doubt. Demons were master manipulators. After all, they would say anything to undermine a hunter's resolve. But the words carried a sincerity that was difficult to dismiss. More troubling were the changes to Soulreaver itself. The weapon's hunger had become audible, a low humming that grew louder whenever blood was spilled, whether demonic or otherwise. Sometimes in the quiet moments between battles, I caught myself having conversations with the scythe as if it could understand and respond. "Feeling hungry again, old friend?" I would ask, and swear I could feel its agreement thrumming through the metal. The city's older residents spoke of the flooded districts in fearful tones that went beyond mere superstition. Ancient texts in the Covenant's archives mentioned something called the Drowned Mourner, a sovereign of the abyss that had been chained beneath Droswen centuries ago by a coalition of mages whose names were lost to history. According to the fragmentary records, the Mourner wasn't just another demon lord. It was something older, a fragment of the void that existed before creation began. Its imprisonment required the sacrifice of an entire generation of the city's children, their life force used to forge chains that could hold something beyond physical existence. The texts described its influence as subtle but pervasive. Unlike other demons that relied on brute force or obvious corruption, the Mourner specialized in turning heroes into villains through gradual manipulation. It would identify individuals with noble intentions and slowly twist their actions until they served its agenda while believing they were doing good. I dismissed these accounts as local folklore, mixed with religious hysteria. Every city had legends about ancient evils lurking beneath its foundations. The fact that Droswin's particular myth involved a creature that corrupted heroes was just unfortunate coincidence, but as my hunt progressed deeper into the sunken ruins, certain details began to align. In ways that made my skin crawl, the architecture below was wrong, in ways that defied rational explanation. Stone corridors stretched impossibly far, before ending abruptly at walls that shouldn't exist. Chambers appeared larger inside than their external dimensions allowed. Staircases descended for what felt like hours before depositing me on levels that should have been far underground. The flooded passages weren't just filled with stagnant water, they pulsed with warmth, as if heated by some massive heart beating far below. The rhythm matched my own pulse with unsettling precision, creating a feedback loop that made it difficult to distinguish between my heartbeat and the buildings. And everywhere, carved into walls worn smooth by centuries of water damage, were faces locked in eternal screams. But they weren't random decorations. The closer I looked, the more they resembled the missing citizens of Drosswin Reach. People who had vanished over the years, their features preserved in stone as if the building itself was documenting its victims. My weapons grew heavier with each descent, not physically, but spiritually. Every swing of Soulreaver required more effort, as if the weapon was fighting against some invisible resistance. The silver runes on my armor had begun to flicker erratically, their light dim and unreliable. But the most disturbing change was in my own mind. The nightmares were bleeding into my waking hours, creating moments of disorientation where I couldn't distinguish between memory and hallucination. I would be walking through a corridor and suddenly see it filled with the ghosts of my victims, all speaking in unison about forgiveness and understanding. The breakthrough came on my 7th day in Drosswin Reach, when I encountered something that shattered every assumption I'd built about the nature of demons. I was pursuing what appeared to be a standard hunting party, 3 medium-sized creatures with the usual elongated limbs and predatory stance, through a maze of flooded chambers. They stayed just far enough ahead to avoid direct confrontation, leading me deeper into the ruins with the kind of intelligence that suggested either pack coordination or deliberate strategy. The chase ended in a circular chamber where black water lapped against steps carved from single blocks of stone. Ancient murals covered the walls, depicting scenes of transformation and sacrifice that predated any known civilization. At the center of the room, my quarry waited, in a formation that looked disturbingly like prayer. As I watched, their forms began to shift. The elongated limbs shortened. Extra teeth retracted into more human proportions. Claws became fingernails. The transformation wasn't violent or chaotic. It was gentle, almost relieved, as if the creatures were finally allowed to return to their true shapes. Within minutes, 3 demons had become 3 human beings: an elderly woman, a middle-aged merchant, and a child who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. They looked at me with eyes full of confusion and dawning horror. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. She couldn't remember. "I don't understand what's happening. One moment I was tending my garden, and then everything changed. There was so much hunger, so much rage, but it wasn't mine." The child was sobbing. "I want to go home. I want my mother. Why can't I remember where I live?" I stood frozen, Soulreaver trembling in my grip. This was impossible. Demons were creatures of pure malice born from the abyss. They didn't have human forms hidden beneath monstrous exteriors. They didn't remember families or homes or gardens. But the evidence knelt before me in the flickering torchlight, as undeniable as sunrise. "You're the demon hunter," the merchant said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're here to save us." The words hit me like a physical blow. Save them? From what? From the transformation they'd already undergone? From the monstrous shapes they'd been forced to wear, while some external power controlled their actions? "How long have you been missing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Missing?" The woman looked genuinely bewildered. "I'm not missing. I was just working in my garden this morning." "Ma'am," I said as gently as possible, "according to city records, you disappeared over 2 weeks ago." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched their faces as the implication sank in. 2 weeks of their lives simply gone, replaced by memories of hunger and violence that belonged to something else entirely. Before any of us could speak again, the water in the chamber began to churn. Something vast was rising from the depths below, something that turned the black liquid to foam with its approach. The 3 humans scrambled backward as waves lapped against the stone steps with increasing urgency. "He comes," the child said in a voice that was no longer entirely her own. "He comes to reclaim what was borrowed." The transformation happened in reverse this time, but I could see the process clearly now. It wasn't possession in any traditional sense. It was more like a mask being pulled over their features, a secondary nature imposed from outside their control, human features elongated. Consciousness retreated behind alien impulses. Sanity fled as something hungry and ancient took residence in their minds. Within seconds, I was facing 3 demons again. But now I had seen what they'd been before. Now I understood what was being hidden beneath the monstrous exterior. The battle was brief and brutal because that's how I'd been trained to fight. Shadow Step carried me behind the largest creature, while execution mode made my strikes too fast to counter. Soulreaver carved through transformed flesh with its usual hungry efficiency, and Blood Reaper drew their essence into my armor as they fell. But as each demon died, it whispered something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Thank you for freeing us from the hunger. Thank you for ending the pain. Thank you for letting us go home." I made it 3 steps towards the chamber's exit before my legs gave out and I collapsed onto the wet stone. The implications were staggering, reality-shattering, in ways that threatened to destroy everything I believed about my purpose in the world. If what I'd witnessed was real and the evidence was undeniable, then demons weren't separate creatures at all. They were humans, transformed by some external force into monstrous shapes, and driven by artificial impulses they couldn't control or understand. Which meant that every demon I'd ever killed, I vomited until my stomach was empty, then dry heaved for another 10 minutes while my mind tried to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. 372 kills. 372 human beings, whose only crime was being selected for transformation by something that needed them to die. When I finally looked up, I found fresh words carved into the chamber walls, scratched into stone that had been smooth moments before. They spelled out a message in the old tongue, letters that seemed to writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Welcome home, faithful servant." The descent into madness took 3 more days. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what I might see in my dreams. I stopped eating, unable to trust that food wouldn't taste like the blood I'd spilled. I wandered through the flooded ruins like a ghost, following passages that led deeper underground while my armor grew heavier with accumulated guilt. The lower levels were a museum of horrors, holding cells where humans had been chained while something worked its influence on their minds and bodies. Ritual circles carved into floors and walls, their grooves dark with centuries of dried blood, and everywhere, journals written by previous victims, documenting their gradual loss of humanity. I read them all, driven by a compulsion to understand the scope of what had been done in my name. One entry, scrawled in increasingly erratic handwriting, stood out among the others. Day 18. The hunger grows stronger every hour. I dreamed I was something else last night, something with too many teeth and no name. When I woke, my fingernails had grown into claws, and there were scratches on the wall that I don't remember making. The voice in my head keeps saying I deserve this transformation, that I've done terrible things and this is my punishment, but I can't remember what I could have done to warrant such horror. I can't remember anything except the hunger and the voice that whispers about justice. Another written in a child's careful script. The man in dark armor visited us again today. He looked through the bars at us and smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. He said we were going to help him with something important. He said we were going to be heroes who saved the world from monsters. I asked if I could see my mama first, but he just walked away without answering. I don't think we're going to be heroes. I think we're going to become the monsters. A third entry, in handwriting, I recognized as belonging to Mayor Greystone. I understand now why the Covenant sent their best hunter to our city. Not to save us from demons, but to create them. Each missing citizen was carefully selected based on criteria I'm only beginning to understand. The elderly and infirm, those with no family to search for them, troublemakers who asked too many questions about city finances. We've been cleaning house and I've been helping them do it. God forgive me. I thought I was protecting the city. I thought the disappearances were acceptable losses if they kept the majority safe. But there are no demons except the ones we create. There never were. The final entry was written in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it. The transformation is beginning to affect me as well. I can feel something stirring in the depths of my mind, whispering suggestions that sound increasingly reasonable. It tells me that what I've discovered doesn't change the fundamental truth. Evil people deserve to die, regardless of whether they've been transformed into demons first. It reminds me how much I've enjoyed the killing, how satisfying it feels to watch life drain from my victim's eyes. It suggests that perhaps the transformation process isn't corruption at all, but revelation. Perhaps I've always been a monster, and the demon hunting simply gave me an excuse to indulge my true nature. I stared at the page, written in my own hand, but containing thoughts I didn't remember thinking. The implications were terrifying, not just because someone or something had influenced me to write words I couldn't recall, but because the words felt true. How many times had I gone out of my way to make kills more brutal than necessary? How many times had I prolonged a victim's suffering just to savor their death screams? How many times had I felt disappointed when a hunt ended too quickly, depriving me of the opportunity to inflict more violence? The monster responsible for Droswen Reach's suffering hadn't corrupted me. It had simply given me permission to be what I'd always been. The final level wasn't a chamber, it was a cathedral. Massive stone pillars rose into darkness above, their surfaces covered with carvings that seemed to move when viewed peripherally. The floor was a mosaic made from thousands of human skulls, each one polished to ivory perfection and arranged in patterns that hurt to contemplate. At the center, partially submerged in a pool of black water that reflected no light, sat something that might once have been worshipped as divine. The drowned mourner looked almost human from a distance, but proximity revealed the wrongness that permeated its existence. Its limbs had too many joints, allowing movement in directions that violated basic anatomy. Its skin rippled like water, occasionally revealing glimpses of something swimming beneath the surface. Most disturbing were its eyes. Not the glowing orbs I expected, but perfect mirrors that reflected every terrible thing I'd ever done. Chains of impossible metals bound the creature to the cathedral floor, each link inscribed with words that seemed to shift and change when I tried to read them. But the chains were breaking. Hairline fractures ran along their length, and several links had already shattered completely, their fragments scattered across the mosaic floor like broken promises. Finally! It spoke without moving its mouth, the words forming directly in my mind with the weight of falling mountains, My most faithful servant arrives to witness the culmination of his work. I raised Soulreaver, but the weapon felt sluggish and unresponsive, as if it was fighting against my commands. I'm not your servant. I came here to end you. The thing that called itself the drowned Mourner laughed, and the sound made the cathedral's walls weep tears of blood that traced patterns in forgotten languages. End me, dear faithful Kaelen. You have been serving my agenda for years. Every soul you've harvested, every life you've taken in my name, has weakened these ancient bonds one link at a time. You are my freedom made flesh, my will made manifest. That's impossible. I kill demons. I protect humanity from the forces of darkness. Do you? The creature's voice carried the patience of geological ages. Tell me, my devoted servant, when did you last witness the transformation process from beginning to end? When did you last see a human become a demon before your eyes? You strike so quickly, kill so efficiently. How can you be certain your targets were actually demons when you found them? The question struck like a blade between my ribs. I tried to remember specific instances, but every battle blurred together in a haze of blood and violence. Shadow Step allowed me to attack before enemies could react. Execution mode ended conflicts in seconds. In 5 years of hunting, had I ever actually witnessed someone become a demon? Had I ever seen the transformation process that created my targets? The nightmares you've endured these past months are not manifestations of guilt, the Mourner continued, reading my confusion with obvious satisfaction. They are my memories flowing into your mind as the barriers between us weaken. Every innocent you've murdered in my name strengthens our connection, brings us closer to true unity. I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to run. The cathedral had only one entrance, and it lay behind the chained entity. The Covenant would never... They're dedicated to protecting people. They fought demons for 1,000 years. Your precious Ashen Covenant serves my resurrection, whether they understand it or not, the Mourner said, its form shifting slightly in its bonds. They create hunters like you, enhance you with power drawn from ancient rituals they no longer comprehend, and send you forth to cleanse the world of evil. But you only cleanse it of obstacles to my return. The creature's eyes, those perfect mirrors, showed me visions of my own past. The day I joined the Covenant, eager to make a difference in the world. My first enhancement ceremony, where hooded figures chanted in languages that predated human speech while power flowed into my veins. The moment I first held Soulreaver, feeling the weapon's hunger resonate with something dark and eager in my own soul. The process is elegantly simple, the Mourner explained as the visions continued. I select humans who pose potential threats to my agenda, those who ask inconvenient questions, those who might rally others against supernatural influence, those who simply possess the strength of will to resist corruption. Then, I flood them with a fragment of my essence, just enough to trigger a temporary transformation. The mirrors showed me scenes I'd never witnessed, but somehow remembered. Ordinary people going about their daily lives when something invisible struck them like lightning. The moment of transformation, consciousness retreating as alien impulses flooded their minds. The desperate attempt to maintain human thought while something hungry and ancient puppeted their bodies. The transformation is temporary by design, the Mourner continued. Left alone, the subjects would revert to human form within days as my influence faded. But that's where my faithful hunters come in. You arrive while they're still in their monstrous state, eliminating them before the change can reverse itself. I watched myself in the mirrors, seeing hunts from the perspective of my victims, the terror in their eyes as Shadow Step carried me behind them. The moment of recognition when they realized I wasn't there to save them, but to end them. The relief that followed death, freedom from the hunger and rage that had consumed their final days. Each death feeds power directly into these chains, the Mourner said, gesturing at its restraints. Every soul consumed by your weapon comes to me, weakening the bonds one link at a time. Your legendary reputation was carefully orchestrated. Every contract chosen to maximize both the number of deaths and the psychological impact on your developing abilities. The implications crashed over me like a tide of ice water. 372 kills. 372 human beings whose only crime was being selected for sacrifice by something ancient and patient. I had been a mass murderer, masquerading as a hero, and the evidence of my crimes was literally chained before me, growing stronger with each life I'd taken. But the most beautiful aspect of my plan, the Mourner said, reading the horror in my expression, is that it required no deception on my part. You killed because you wanted to kill. The story about protecting humanity simply made it palatable to your conscious mind. The words hit me like physical blows because I couldn't deny their truth. Every hunt had brought a rush of satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. Every death scream had validated something dark and hungry in my soul. Every drop of essence absorbed through Blood Reaper had felt like communion with something greater than myself. I had never questioned the pleasure I took in violence because I believed it served a righteous cause. But looking back with honest eyes, I could see the pattern clearly. I had volunteered for every assignment. I had requested the most dangerous contracts. I had gone out of my way to make kills more brutal than necessary, not because the situation demanded it, but because I enjoyed the spectacle of suffering. The abilities you treasure so highly, the Mourner said, its voice now carrying notes of genuine affection, are fragments of my own power, channeled through that magnificent weapon of yours. Every time you absorb life force through Blood Reaper, you're feeding it to me through our connection. Every nightmare you project through your shards carries a piece of my essence into reality. You haven't been hunting demons, Kaelen Dravik. You've been preparing the world for my dominion. Soulreaver grew impossibly heavy in my hands as the truth sank in. The weapon I'd trusted for years, the partner I'd spoken to in quiet moments, had been nothing more than a conduit connecting me to this ancient evil. Every soul it had consumed, every drop of blood it had tasted, had gone directly into breaking these chains. And I had known. On some level, I had always known. The hunger in the weapon's voice when it whispered for blood. The way it seemed to guide my strikes toward maximum suffering, rather than quick death. The satisfaction I felt when absorbing life force, as if I was sharing a meal with something that appreciated fine cuisine. You understand now, the Mourner said softly, its tone almost gentle. The distinction between hero and monster was always an illusion. You killed because you are a killer. The rest was simply elaborate justification. I wanted to deny it, but the words died in my throat like prayers in a burning church. How many times had I lingered over a killing blow, savoring the moment when hope died in my victim's eyes? How many times had I chosen the painful path, when a quick death would have been more merciful? How many times had I told myself it was about justice when it was really about the intoxicating rush of absolute power over another being's existence? What will it be, my faithful servant? The Mourner asked, its voice now carrying the weight of inevitability. You stand at a crossroads that has been prepared for you since the day you first picked up that scythe. You can continue to deny your nature, attempt some futile gesture of heroism that will only delay the inevitable. The alternative hung between us like smoke from a funeral pyre. Or you can embrace what you've always been, shatter the remaining chains and absorb my power completely. The nightmares will end because there will be no more guilt to torment you. You'll walk from this place as the new sovereign of the abyss, with legions bowing before your throne. I stared at Soulreaver, watching my reflection fragment across its blade like a broken mirror. The weapon that had defined my identity, made me legendary among demon hunters, had been nothing more than a leash connecting me to this ancient horror. But in that moment of terrible clarity, I realized something that the Mourner hadn't anticipated. I didn't care. The revelation should have destroyed me. Learning that I'd spent 5 years murdering innocent people should have driven me to madness or suicide. Discovering that my heroic reputation was built on a foundation of manipulation and deceit should have shattered my sense of self. Instead, I felt relieved. For the first time in months, the weight of pretense lifted from my shoulders. I no longer had to maintain the fiction that I was one of the good ones. I no longer had to justify the pleasure I took in causing pain. I no longer had to pretend that the screaming bothered me. "You're right," I said, my voice carrying a calm that surprised us both. "I am a killer. I always have been. The only question is whether I'll be your killer or my own." The Mourner's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across features that had worn confidence like armor. "You cannot be serious. To absorb my power directly would transform you beyond recognition. You would become something that transcends mortal existence entirely." I stepped forward, and the black water parted around my boots like it was afraid to touch me. I stopped being mortal the day I took my first life. Everything since then has been elaborate theatre. But I wasn't walking toward the chained entity. I was moving to examine the prison itself, studying the fractured links and ancient inscriptions with the eye of someone who had spent years learning to find weak points in supernatural defenses. "The bonds that hold you," I said, running my fingers along one of the massive chains, "they're not just physical restraints. They're spiritual anchors, designed to contain something that exists partially outside normal reality." "Yes," the Mourner said, wariness creeping into its voice. "Forged by the sacrifice of an entire generation, they bind me across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But they're breaking because you've been feeding them the souls I've harvested. Each death weakens the structure a little more." I smiled, and for the first time in years, the expression felt genuine. "Here's what I find interesting. The chains aren't designed to kill you. They're designed to hold you, which means the people who built this prison wanted you alive." The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. "They needed you for something," I continued, my mind racing through possibilities. "Something important enough to justify keeping a creature of your power contained rather than destroyed. The question is what?" I found my answer carved into the base of the largest pillar, hidden beneath centuries of accumulated grime. The inscription was in the old tongue, but years of studying demonic texts had given me enough familiarity to pass the meaning. "Here lies bound the first hunger whose dreams give birth to lesser darkness. Should its essence be released uncontrolled, the infection will spread until all existence becomes appetite. Should its power be claimed by one of sufficient will, the crowned sovereign may channel the hunger towards worthy targets, sparing the innocent while devouring the corrupt." "You're not just a demon lord," I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "You're a source, the origin point for a particular type of supernatural influence. The people who chained you weren't trying to stop you, they were trying to control you." The Mourner's form writhed against its bonds, no longer trying to hide its agitation. "Clever servant. Too clever for your own good. The binding ritual was designed to create a vessel capable of channeling my power without being consumed by it. But the last worthy candidate died centuries ago, leaving me trapped and starving. Until you created a new one." I laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the cathedral's acoustics. "You've been training me for years, haven't you? Not just to break your chains, but to be strong enough to contain your essence without losing myself completely. The process required someone with natural aptitude for violence, but enough discipline to direct it purposefully," the Mourner admitted. "Someone capable of rationalizing atrocity while maintaining functional sanity. someone who could become a monster while believing himself a hero. And now you want me to complete the transformation willingly, thinking I'll become your puppet once I absorb your power. I shook my head. But that's not how it works, is it? The inscription says, one of sufficient will for a reason. You need someone strong enough to dominate your essence, not be dominated by it. For the first time since our conversation began, the Mourner looked genuinely afraid. You don't understand the magnitude of what you're contemplating. My power is not meant for mortal minds. It will consume everything you are, leaving only hunger wearing your face. Maybe, I said, raising Soulreaver and feeling its weight settle into my hands like an old friend returning home. But I've been sharing my mind with fragments of your influence for years, and I'm still here, still me, for better or worse. I think I can handle the full dose. The chains holding the Mourner began to glow as I approached, ancient wards recognizing the presence of something that didn't belong. But Soulreaver cut through mystical barriers as easily as it carved through flesh. With 3 precise strikes, I shattered the weakened links that had held the creature for centuries. The drowned Mourner rose from its prison like a tide of liquid nightmare, its form expanding to fill the cathedral from floor to ceiling. Power radiated from its essence in waves that made reality itself seem fragile, but I felt no fear, only anticipation. You have made a terrible mistake, it said, its voice now carrying the sound of civilization's drowning. I am not some minor entity to be absorbed. I am a force of nature, a fragment of the void that existed before creation. You cannot contain infinity within finite boundaries. I smiled as shadows began to coalesce around my armor, drawn by power that no longer needed to hide itself. I'm not planning to contain you. I'm planning to become you. There's a difference. The battle that followed existed somewhere beyond conventional physics. We fought across dimensions I didn't have names for, using weapons forged from crystallized concepts rather than mere matter. The Mourner struck with tendrils of pure entropy, each one capable of unmaking the fundamental forces that held atoms together. I countered with abilities enhanced beyond their original design, Shadow Step allowing me to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, while Execution Mode pushed my reflexes into the realm of prophecy. But the real conflict wasn't physical. It was spiritual, a contest of will between 2 beings that had transcended the normal boundaries of existence. The Mourner tried to overwhelm my identity with visions of what I would become. A creature of endless appetite devouring reality itself piece by piece, leaving nothing but void in my wake. I responded by showing it my own visions, a world cleansed of pretense and hypocrisy, where strength determined worth and the weak existed only to serve the strong. A reality where monsters no longer needed to hide behind noble facades, where power was its own justification. The absorption process began slowly, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. The Mourner's essence flowed into me through Soulreaver, carrying with it eons of accumulated knowledge and hunger. I felt my human limitations dissolving, replaced by awareness that spanned dimensions and comprehension that encompassed the fundamental building blocks of reality. But I also felt something the Mourner hadn't expected. Resistance, my will, tempered by years of violence and strengthened by recent revelations about my true nature, proved strong enough to maintain coherence, even as alien power flooded my being. Instead of being consumed by the Mourner's essence, I began to reshape it, filtering its raw hunger through my own understanding of purpose and direction. Impossible, the Mourner gasped as our roles reversed, my will imposing structure on its chaotic nature. You are merely mortal. You cannot dominate something that predates existence itself. You're right, I said, feeling my physical form dissolve and reconstruct itself around principles that violated natural law. I can't dominate something that old and powerful, but I can make it part of something new. The final stages of the merger were almost peaceful. Instead of one consciousness consuming the other, we became something unprecedented, a synthesis of ancient hunger and modern purpose, primordial power guided by contemporary understanding of efficiency and effectiveness. When the transformation finished, I stood alone in the cathedral. The chains lay in pieces around an empty pool of water. My armor had become something that seemed carved from solidified night, and Soulreaver had evolved into a weapon that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could perceive. The nightmares were gone. For the first time in months, my mind was crystalline clear. I walked from the flooded depths of Droswin Reach as the city above began to experience changes of its own. The ancient floodgates that had held back black water for centuries finally gave way, releasing torrents that carried more than just liquid. They carried transformation, evolution, the promise of a better world built on honest foundations. Mayor Greystone was waiting for me at the city gates, his face pale with knowledge he wished he didn't possess. "Is it over?" he asked. "The old world?" I smiled, and he took an involuntary step backward. "Yes, that's definitely over. What happens now?" "Now we build something better. Something more honest about what humanity really is beneath all the pretty lies." I gestured towards the rising water behind us. No more pretending that some people don't deserve to die. No more elaborate justifications for necessary culling. No more heroes and villains, just strong and weak. Greystone's hand moved toward the sword at his hip, then stopped as intelligence overcame instinct. "And if we refuse?" "Then you'll be among the weak," I said simply, "and the weak exist only at the sufferance of their betters." The first reports reached the Ashen Covenant 3 days later. Demon attacks had ceased worldwide, but something else was happening. Citizens in cities across the globe spoke of a figure in dark armor walking through their streets at night. Some claimed to have seen eyes that burned within a fire. Others reported the sound of metal scraping against stone, like a massive blade being dragged behind an unhurried walker. But the most interesting reports came from other demon hunters. They described dreams where their weapons spoke with new voices, where their abilities felt different, more focused, where the line between righteous violence and personal satisfaction had become so thin as to be meaningless. The Covenant's leadership attributed this to increased stress as supernatural encounters became more frequent across all territories. They were partially correct. I hadn't destroyed the system that created demon hunters. I had perfected it. Where the Mourner had worked through crude transformation and indirect influence, I could be more elegant, more personal. Each active hunter now carried a fragment of my awareness, carefully hidden beneath their existing abilities. When they dreamed my dreams. When they fought with power that came with subtle modifications to their targeting priorities. Politicians who opposed expansion of hunting authority began radiating the kind of energy signatures that screamed demonic threat to enhance senses. Religious leaders who preached about the sanctity of all life found themselves manifesting auras that registered as supernatural corruption. The beauty of the new system was its subtlety. Hunters still believed they were protecting humanity, still felt the righteous satisfaction of duty fulfilled and evil defeated. The only difference was in target selection. Instead of waiting for innocent people to be randomly transformed into monsters, I could simply designate problematic individuals as legitimate threats and let my servants handle the cleanup. The world was cleaning itself, one justified kill at a time. But perhaps the most satisfying development was watching new hunters discover their enhanced abilities. Young men and women driven by genuine desire to protect the innocent, finding themselves capable of feats that bordered on miraculous. The joy in their eyes when they first successfully used the shadow step. the pride in their voices when they mastered Blood Reaper, the sense of purpose that came with joining an ancient order dedicated to battling darkness. I remembered that feeling, the certainty that I was one of the good ones, that my actions served a noble cause, that every death brought the world closer to safety. It had been intoxicating then, and it was intoxicating now, just from the other side of the equation. Sometimes late at night when the world was quiet, I would visit my former brothers and sisters in their dreams. Not to torment them, but to offer guidance, to whisper suggestions about techniques that might prove useful in combat, to share visions of enemies that deserved special attention. They always woke feeling refreshed and inspired, ready to face another day of protecting humanity from the monsters that stalked the shadows. 3 months after my transformation, I received an interesting visitor. The woman who appeared in the cathedral wore the traditional blue cloak of a senior Covenant investigator, but her eyes held the kind of intelligence that suggested she understood more than her superiors might prefer. She moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to dangerous situations, and the sword at her hip radiated the particular energy signature of a weapon that had tasted demon blood. "Kaelen Dravik," she said, her voice carrying no fear despite the obvious wrongness of my transformed state. "My name is Victoria Ashbridge. I'm here to determine what happened to one of our most celebrated hunters." I gestured for her to take a seat on one of the stone benches that lined the cathedral walls. "Ask your questions, investigator. I have nothing to hide." "The official reports say you successfully eliminated a major demonic infestation in Drosswin Reach, but the details are inconsistent. Citizens describe seeing you walk into the flooded districts and never emerge, yet here you are, changed but undeniably present." "I found what I was looking for," I said simply, "and it found me. The entity that was imprisoned beneath the city, the drowned Mourner. You encountered it. I did more than encounter it. I learned the truth about what we've been doing all these years, about what the Covenant really is." Victoria's hand moved to her sword hilt, not in threat, but in comfort. "And what truth is that?" "That there are no demons," I said, watching her face carefully. "There never were. Only humans transformed temporarily by external influence, then killed before they could revert to normal. We've been mass murderers masquerading as heroes, and the evidence of our crimes is buried beneath every city that's ever requested our services. I expected shock, denial, perhaps an attack driven by outraged disbelief. Instead, Victoria nodded slowly. "I was afraid you'd figured it out," she said. "How long have you known?" "You knew?" I stared at her, genuinely surprised for the first time in months. "You knew, and you continued operating." "Not all of us," Victoria said carefully, "but some, the senior investigators, a few of the more perceptive hunters. We've been gathering evidence for years, trying to determine the scope of the deception." "And what did you discover?" "That it goes all the way to the top. The Covenant's founders weren't heroes who discovered a way to fight demons. They were mages who found a method for identifying and eliminating threats to social stability. The enhancement rituals that give hunters their abilities. They're designed to make us more sensitive to specific types of supernatural influence, the same influence that gets used to mark targets for elimination." Victoria stood and began pacing, her agitation finally showing. "Every contract we receive is carefully vetted by people who understand the real purpose of our organization. They select individuals who pose problems for the existing power structure, revolutionaries, reformers, anyone who might threaten the status quo, then arrange for them to be temporarily transformed and marked for death." "How many hunters know?" "Perhaps a dozen out of several hundred active operatives. Most genuinely believe they're protecting humanity. The truth is difficult to accept. Yet you accepted it. Why?" Victoria stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Because once I understood what we really were, I realized something important. The people we eliminate might not be demons, but they're not innocent either. Revolutionaries destabilize governments, reformers disrupt social order, troublemakers create chaos that gets innocent people killed. She smiled, and there was something cold in the expression. I didn't become a hunter to protect demons, Kaelen. I became one to protect civilization. Learning that our targets are human doesn't change the fundamental necessity of what we do. I studied her for a long moment, processing implications that were simultaneously horrifying and encouraging. You're saying the Covenant has always been exactly what it appears to be, an organization dedicated to maintaining order through the elimination of threats. The only deception was about the nature of those threats. Precisely. And now that you've absorbed the Mourner's power, you're in a position to make the whole system more efficient. No more waiting for random transformations. No more elaborate staging. Just identify threats and eliminate them. And you're volunteering to help? I'm volunteering to serve, Victoria said, kneeling in a gesture of formal submission. The old system was wasteful and imprecise. Under your guidance, we could create something worthy of the legends people tell about us. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a funeral pyre. I wanted to reject everything she'd said, to maintain the fiction that I was one of the good ones, that my actions had meaning beyond mere murder, dressed up in righteous clothing. But I couldn't, because standing there surrounded by bodies I'd created, holding a weapon that hummed with satisfaction at fresh bloodshed, wearing armor that felt heavier with each innocent life it had helped me take, I finally understood what I really was. Not a hero, not a monster, just a killer who'd been given excellent reasons to kill. What happens now? I asked. Victoria smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Now you have a choice. You can reject the truth, go mad with guilt, and probably end up killing yourself, like most hunters who reach this point. Or you can accept that the world is more complicated than childhood stories about good and evil, and help us make it a better place through practical solutions to practical problems. She gestured at the bodies around us. These 3 people are dead either way, but their deaths can serve a purpose if we choose to learn from them. Their sacrifice can prevent larger conflicts, greater suffering, more widespread death and chaos. And if I refuse, then you'll be marked for transformation yourself within the week, Victoria said matter-of-factly. Hunters who learn the truth and reject it become security risks. Security risks get eliminated. It's nothing personal, just mathematics. I laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the chamber's acoustics. Not because I found anything funny, but because the choice wasn't really a choice at all. I could pretend to be horrified by the revelation, maintain the illusion that I was somehow better than the organization that had shaped me, and die with clean hands and a clear record. Or I could acknowledge what I'd always known deep down, that I enjoyed the killing, that power felt better than righteousness, that the strong taking what they wanted from the weak was the most honest relationship possible between humans. Tell me about the drowned Mourner, I said. Victoria's expression shifted, wariness replacing confidence. What about it? The entity imprisoned beneath this city, the source of the power that's been feeding the transformation process for centuries. I want to know everything. Why? I hefted Soulreaver, feeling its weight settle into my hands like an old friend returning home. Because if I'm going to stop pretending to be a hero, I might as well find out what being an honest monster feels like. The reformation of the Ashen Covenant took 18 months of careful maneuvering and selective elimination of problematic elements. Victoria proved invaluable in identifying which hunters could be trusted with partial truth and which needed to be quietly removed from the organization. The new structure maintained the same public face, noble warriors dedicated to protecting humanity from supernatural threats, while operating with unprecedented efficiency behind the scenes. Contracts were now issued based on comprehensive psychological profiles, rather than random transformations. Targets were selected for maximum social benefit rather than convenience. The best part was that most hunters never realized anything had changed. They continued to see demons when they looked at their targets. They continued to feel righteous satisfaction when eliminating threats to innocent people. They continued to believe they were heroes saving the world from monsters, which in a way they were. The difference was that now the monsters were chosen more carefully. 5 years have passed since my transformation, and the world has become a more honest place. Crime rates have plummeted as individuals with antisocial tendencies find themselves experiencing temporary, monstrous episodes that require hunter intervention. Political corruption has virtually disappeared, as officials who abuse their power develop auras that register as demonic to trained senses. The weak still exist, but they know their place. They understand that their continued survival depends on the sufferance of their betters. They contribute to society in proportion to their abilities and make no trouble that might draw unwanted attention. It's not the world everyone wanted, but it's the world everyone deserves. And in the end, that's what justice really means, giving people exactly what they've earned through their choices and actions. I still carry Soulreaver, though the weapon has evolved far beyond its original form. It no longer hungers for blood because it no longer needs to feed. The power flows both ways now, with me nourishing it as much as it nourishes me. Sometimes hunters ask me about the scythe's history, and I tell them the truth. It's a tool for bringing order to chaos, for separating the worthy from the worthless. They always nod in understanding, these young heroes with fire in their eyes and justice in their hearts. They see the weapon as a symbol of everything they hope to become, and they're not wrong. After all, Soulreaver has always been exactly what it appeared to be, an instrument for reaping souls. The only question was which souls deserved harvesting. Now we know. The nightmares stopped completely after my transformation, replaced by dreams of a perfected world where strength and virtue are synonymous, where protection and domination are understood to be the same thing, where heroes and monsters are distinguished not by their methods, but by their targets. It's a beautiful dream, and every day we make it a little more real. My job is still to slaughter demons. The only difference is that now I get to decide which ones deserve the title, and that more than any power or transformation is what makes me truly dangerous. Because the best monsters are the ones who never stop believing they're the heroes of their own story. Even when they're not, especially when they're not.